my name is Layton. I'm an intuitive and a mystic. And today I wanted to talk about something that I've been working on for a while, but some of you know there was a lot going on in my life that made me need some time off. For example, my wife and I were impacted by the hurricane, and there was so much that happened with that that where I needed, I needed to take space and I needed to kind of just allow my nervous system to recover. I also don't consider myself an influencer. So when I have things going on in my life, it's very important to me to take that time away because I consider myself to be a teacher and I believe in leading by example. And for me, it was so important for me to take that time and that rest and to prioritize the recovery of my nervous system. And I always want to do that so that other people know that's okay, because I feel like I have had people lead by example for me in ways that helped me feel more comfortable, doing things like that and taking time when I needed it. So that being said, my sabbatical is over, and I have some videos coming up. I on my Instagram, if you don't follow me there, it's the same name as here, Psychic Somatics. And I had asked if anyone had any questions about egregores and thought forms and psychic protection and things like that. So I got some questions and I'm going to be recording my answers to them shortly. I was actually going to do that today, but I really felt it on my heart to talk about this. So I actually I'm going to have linked in the description box a link to my website, and I have a little presentation that you can go look at to kind of follow along, but also because this is such an important topic and I want people to feel like they have resources. And I am going to be going pretty surface level in this because depending on how you guys feel about it, I would really like to create a course where I kind of go very in depth and walk everyone through step by step kind of how to get from a place of feeling very fragmented as a psychic and feeling like you're under constant psychic attack, or feeling spiritually tortured and not knowing what to do with that, feeling very broken and dissociated as an individual, but specifically from a psychic point of view, to getting to a place of being very grounded and embodied and being able to handle certain experiences that you couldn't handle before. And I have had some really awesome mentors that have helped me with this tremendously. One of which being a therapist that I only had for a very short period of time, because I ended up moving and I couldn't see her out of state. But she was also a medium and she was really great. And she gave me some tips that helped to point me in the right direction to then find later people who were able to help me kind of navigate what I was going through a little bit through their work. So yeah, it's really important to me because for those of you that don't know, I used to be incredibly psychically fragmented. I, from a very young age, had psychic experiences. In fact, it's kind of a thing in my family to talk about some of the creepy, weird things that I said when I was a kid, that there's just no way that I would have had the vocabulary to articulate certain things, and yet somehow I did. And I was talking about ghosts and, having experiences that I just didn't know how to explain. But the issue with that is that I was also raised in a very dogmatic religious household where everything was understood through a very dogmatic Christian lens. And so all of my experiences, regardless of what they were, I really perceived through this filter of, this is something demonic. I'm experiencing spiritual warfare, and it must mean that I'm demonic. I'm bad. I'm doing something wrong. I'm like a sorcerer or something like that, because that was the understanding that I had. And from a young age, I was reading the Left Behind books, and I thought that I was going to be left behind because I was constantly having these experiences. And because I didn't have any understanding of what I was experiencing, I was petrified all the time. And this followed me into adulthood. So pretty much as soon as I was able to or had access to drugs and alcohol, which was, before I was of legal age, I was consuming that any chance I got because my life was consumed with fear. And I was also very traumatized by different things that had happened to me in my childhood. And I didn't know how to handle any of it. And sometimes when I was under the influence, I would have experiences that would terrify me so much. And so it just felt like I couldn't escape it. And so I had also been medicated from a very young age. And as I got older, I kind of had this mindset of, well, obviously something is very wrong with me. I can't stop these experiences. They're terrifying to me. And I was very honest with my therapist and psychiatrist about what I was experiencing, which led to me being diagnosed with all kinds of things, and led to me being told that I was experiencing psychosis. And I wasn't experiencing psychosis, I was experiencing psychic phenomena. So basically, I got to a point where I was put on antipsychotics, and because I wasn't psychotic, they put me into psychosis, which was a very terrifying experience for me. And I ended up in a psych ward in the most terrifying place that I could imagine being, to be honest. And I have quite a bit of trauma in my life, but I'm not even going to lie. The amount of time that I spent there was it was it was so traumatizing to me. I didn't feel human anymore. I felt like I had regressed to something that I don't even think I could put into words. And I don't even think I could articulate if I tried to, because it was just such a deeply traumatic experience for me. And I couldn't. I just couldn't believe everything that that I was seeing and going through, and I didn't know when I was going to be able to leave, and or if I was going to be able to leave, and it was really scary. So that aside, my experiences, I went through a period of time where I lived in a house that was. It had a lot. I lived in a house that had a lot of activity, if you know what I mean. And I was extremely psychically open. So I was very clairvoyant, very clairsentient, very clairaudient, very telepathic. And honestly, it was the most terrifying experience of my entire life because I didn't have any esoteric foundation. I didn't have any real understanding of what I was experiencing or how to protect myself. So what would end up happening is I would kind of go down these roads where I would get really into something like the starseed movement or something along those lines. And then I would have some sort of bad experience and I would be terrified by it. So then I would jump into this very dogmatic kind of trauma response as my way of protecting myself from the initial response that I had. And I just kind of kept going through these different cycles because I did not know what to do. I would do so much research and I couldn't find very much on people who were having my kinds of experiences and who could give me something that I could actually do with it. So I would look up psychic protection. Meanwhile, I was having terrifying experiences. I was having abduction experiences. I was having experiences where I would be feeling things physically touch me and hearing things speak in my ear, and really scary, seeing things that I did not want to see in my field. And I just felt tormented all the time. And I would get on Google and type in psychic protection, what can I do to protect myself? And it's like, oh, you just need to sage and it's all going to go away. Or you just need to imagine yourself with a bubble of white light around you and then it'll go away. And I felt so broken. I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why do these things work for other people and they don't work for me? And so it led to me feeling like there was something so inherently wrong with me, inherently off about me. It was something that I must be as a person, as a being that just attracts these things, and I just must be bad is what I ended up thinking. And I had already had so many struggles with mental health at that point in time. I did not want to be alive because my day-to-day experience was torture. It was absolute torture. And I would go on medication and then another medication and another medication, and nothing's helping, nothing's making it better. And so from my perspective of where I am now, it is so difficult for me to even relate to how I used to live and how I used to be, because my life is completely unrecognizable. I'm not on any medications. I haven't been in years. I feel extremely grounded all the time. I'm not chronically under psychic attack like I was before. In fact, it's very rare for me to experience something like that. And you'll notice too, as you go through the things that we're going to talk about, it really does become less and less and less. And I have a deeper understanding, an actual understanding now of how to protect myself and how to go through my day-to-day life in a way that leaves me feeling grounded and embodied. So this is something that I want to offer to other people and share with other people, because if you are experiencing anything even remotely like what I was experiencing, it's awful. It's horrible. And you feel crazy. You feel broken. You feel so lost. And I just felt like I knew that I was really psychic. And then I would have these moments where I would think, am I just crazy? Am I just making up these experiences and none of it's real? And so it would send me into these episodes where I became so paranoid, and I would go out into public and I wouldn't trust my perception of anything. And I would see people and I would be thinking to myself, are they even real? Is any of this real? And I would start to have these really scary thoughts about maybe I died and or maybe I've been in a coma for a long time. Maybe I'm in some sort of messed up purgatory because my life was so traumatic. And it's very terrifying, because it can, even if you're not psychotic and your experiences are very real, it can lead to forms of psychosis. It can lead to psychotic symptoms, because you feel so ungrounded, you feel so terrified, you don't know what's real and what's not, you can't trust your own perception, and it's very dissociative. And I genuinely don't think that there's anything worse. I would have such severe dissociative episodes that I was experiencing possession, actual possession, and that's something that I do think is pretty rare. But I think that when you get to a certain point of being wide open and you are so dissociated from your body, things can easily come in and out. And I know what I experienced. I know how terrifying it was for me. Nothing would ever change my mind about what I experienced at this point in time. And I do think that, it's possible to experience severe dissociation and not also experience possession. But people who experience chronic, severe dissociation need the esoteric training and understanding on how to come back into the body and how to actually ground yourself, not just go outside and stick your feet in the grass, because if you are severely dissociated, you don't even feel your feet. You just don't. Everything is numb. You are detached completely. And so we need to really work from the ground up, and start at the root and kind of unravel everything, which requires a lot of heavy lifting. This is not easy. It's not something where you just, study a few things and make a few minor changes, and this stuff just happens on its own. It's not. You have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of legwork, a lot of esoteric training, a lot of studying, a lot of prioritizing healing and prioritizing recovery, because this stuff does not happen on its own. And our society is set up for us to fail. It's set up for us to dissociate and for us to detach from ourselves. And I would also like to make it clear that if you are operating from a state like that right now, that is nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing shameful about dissociating. It is the body's natural physiological response to trauma, to survival mode, to fear. And so what we end up having to do is teaching the body how to feel safe, even in a terrifying circumstance, how to resource safety within ourselves and within our connection to God, so that we aren't falling deeper into fear and connecting with these lower astral entities. Because I know for me, when I first started to kind of really understand what was happening to me, it was so terrifying. It was easier for me to see myself as crazy, because if I saw myself as crazy, then it meant that the reality I was experiencing wasn't actually what I was experiencing. If I saw myself as crazy, that was less terrifying than understanding that I had these lower astral entities inhabiting my form. That's horrific to think about. And it was very scary, but they feed off of our fear, and fear is not going to help us make any progress. So even though it is scary, we do not have to feed that fear and allow ourselves to drop into a place of being absolutely petrified in order to make change. That is going to be so counterproductive. So what we actually have to do is understand that even when things like that are happening, we are still safe. So if you look at it this way, if you think of, say you go and you're at a lake with some friends and you wade out into the water and you come out and you have a tick on you, or a leech. I'm thinking of blood-sucking animals and I'm like, wait, ticks aren't in the water. Regardless, whether you are in the grass or in the water, you have this blood-sucking thing on you, which is obviously scary and uncomfortable. I personally think leeches are grosser and scarier, so we're gonna go with the leech. And your reaction might be to freak out and want to rip it off or something, but instead, we have to remain calm and understand that the more calm we are, the easier of a removal there's going to be of whatever is going on. And it will allow us to assess the situation a bit better and approach it from a more grounded place where we can think more clearly. And if we get into a place of fear, it's not going to change the fact that there's a leech attached to our leg. It's not going to change the fact that we are under the influence of some sort of lower astral entity. But what it is going to do is allow us to begin to take our power back. So that was my long intro to this. So if you have clicked on the link yet and pulled up the presentation, on page 1, it says Healing the Clairvoyant, Recovery from Spiritual Abuse, Psychic Trauma, and Mind Control. So we're going to click on the second slide, which covers causes of psychic trauma. Now, because I want to really focus a lot on the healing portion in this video, otherwise it would be very, very long, I'm not going to go too in-depth into each one of the causes. I'll just touch on it a little bit. But as I said before, if this is something that you're interested in, and I end up doing some sort of course or something to walk through much more in depth, I would most likely have a module that went very deep into things such as ritual abuse and mind control and whatnot. But especially with the nature of this video now, I don't want to stir up more fear, right? So I'm not going to go super in depth into all of those things because I want to focus more on the healing and recovery aspect right now as we jump into this. So the first cause that I have on here of psychic trauma is ritual abuse, mind control, and trauma programming. So when someone experiences ritual abuse, mind control, trauma programming, it's all kind of the same thing. What happens, and what is really the kind of end game in ritual abuse or mind control, is the facilitator is seeking to fragment you psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally. And this actually does work. So the psyche is made up of all of these different aspects and parts. And what happens when we experience repeated trauma, especially in childhood, is that the psyche, those parts that should be together as kind of a whole, they will fragment and kind of split off. And when I say split, what I mean by that is that we could have an experience that causes us to associate more with one specific aspect of the self. For example, if you have a very wounded inner child, then every time you experience some sort of conflict or some sort of trauma, the wounded inner child may immediately come out to the front and be kind of the one steering the ship, so to speak. If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, that's a very good representation of this kind of phenomena. So you would imagine basically one part at a time kind of coming out and taking control. And that can be very problematic when you have, say, a protector part or something that is dissociated from the other aspects of yourself and may come out when you are in fight or flight and be violent or aggressive in some kind of way. So not only does that affect our psyche, but it also impacts us psychically, because there's nothing that can happen to the body and the mind that would then not impact us on a psychic level. It's all interchangeable. And likewise, when we have psychic wounds, they tend to travel over and impact the body and impact the mind. So underneath that, I have fear and dogma programming. And it's all kind of the same thing when you get to the root of it, which is making us fragment, making us dissociate from our intuition, getting us into a place where we are really acting out of the reptilian mind, which is the pain body. It's the survival brain. It's the part of ourselves that is not connected to logic or embodiment or presence, or Christ or anything higher. Instead, we're really operating out of that survival response, that fight or flight, and we don't really know how to process logic, and our memory is fragmented, and our perception is skewed, and we don't know how to view things long term. So we may act in the moment or experience something in the moment and react very strongly to it because we can't see the big picture. We don't have access to that anymore. And that is what would happen to me psychically all the time. I would have an experience with something, some sort of lower astral entity that would absolutely terrify me. And it would lock me in this place of so much fear. And I would immediately dissociate and be so petrified. So there's an example of this that is, I mean, this is like something out of a movie. So I remember I had a different therapist at the time who was trying to convince me that what I was experiencing psychically was not real. You know, it wasn't a real thing. It was manifestations of my fear and all of this stuff. And I had these dowsing rods at the time, which I would never use now. This was a very long time ago. And I was on the phone with her because I had a terrifying experience in my apartment alone, or in my house alone at the time. where I was seeing these clear people, interdimensionals, just walking around. And these are the kinds of things that would happen. And I didn't know what it was. And so I'm immediately thinking, this is a demon. And I was so scared. And she was like, "Oh, it's not real. Why don't you take your dowsing rods and go up and watch? Nothing's gonna happen because it's not real and it's just in your head." And it was literally like something out of a horror movie because I'm on the phone and I had her on speaker, and I think I put it down on like the table next to me or something, and I'm shaking, standing in front of this clear being, and I just hold the dowsing rods up in front of it, and I'm like so scared, and they just start flipping out, going crazy. And not even, I mean, even with my shaking, there's no way that it could have caused that. And so I was so scared because in that moment I felt like I had no anchor. I had nothing to keep me tethered to reality. Everything just felt so scary to me. Everything was the unknown. I didn't know if this thing was going to do something to me. I mean, it was a very scary experience. And those kinds of things would happen to me all the time. So with the fear and dogma programming, I would have these kinds of religious outbursts where I would immediately regress back to my very dogmatic upbringing. And I will never forget this one time where I was seeing all of these entities just walking around in this house. It was very, very scary at the time to me because, again, I didn't have any understanding or any foundation. And I remember calling my parents and flipping out. And I would reach points where I didn't care if people thought I was crazy. I did not care because I was so terrified. I just couldn't keep it in. So I remember calling my parents, and I had my wife with me too. And I've apologized to her about this sense because it was, giving her secondhand trauma having to experience this. But I called my parents and I had them on speakerphone, and I was making them read out of the Bible as I was walking around with the phone, sobbing uncontrollably because I was so scared. And it didn't do anything, because, and that's not to say it didn't do anything because Christ doesn't make these things flee, because actually he does. The force and the impulse of Christ, when we are deeply connected to it, and especially when we have an understanding of who we are connecting with, will step in and protect you from different things. But when we are in a place, and actually Dion Fortune talks about this too. I want to say it's in Applied Magic, which is one of my favorite works of hers. I feel like I say that about everything. I just love everything that she does. But she talks about people that cry, "Lord, Lord, protect me from this thing." But they aren't walking the path. They aren't making certain changes. They aren't educating themselves on different things. And so they end up having certain things happen to them. And instead of kind of progressing forward, they are just constantly relying on being saved, and how detrimental that can be. And I think it's interesting too, because when we have been raised in a very religious household, we have that programming of needing a savior, needing someone to come in and kind of scoop us out of this terrifying situation and do the work for us. So the thing with the fear and dogma programming is that it takes away our accountability. It takes away our trust in ourselves, and we externalize everything. And when we externalize everything, and we're consistently doing that, it's not that these higher forces and these higher beings don't want to come in and save us. Of course they do. They don't want to see us petrified. They don't want to see us afraid and hurting and sad. But there comes a point where we have to learn things for ourselves. And in order for that to happen, we have to get to a certain point, and they have to allow us to get to that point, and that is love. And that's what happened to me. If I had just been rescued again and again and again, I would have believed that it was this dogmatic upbringing that was rescuing me. My understanding would have died there. I never would have sought anything further because at the time, I didn't want to be a mystic. I didn't want to be psychic. In fact, I did everything in my power to become as materialistic and dulled down as possible so that I did not have to have those experiences, because I didn't think it was possible to have psychic experiences in a safe way and in a way that wasn't absolutely traumatic. But they let me get to that point, and I was still very gradually loved along the way, and I was given kind of these little seeds along the way and little nudges that would help to point me in the right direction. So along with causes of psychic trauma, we have mental and spiritual fragmentation, which goes in with the other things we were talking about. We have past lives and karmic trauma. So if you, for example, and this could be a whole video on its own, so I'm not going to go very deep into this because I'm already talking too much. But say in a past life you had a very traumatic death. That is something that could trigger severe dissociation. It could trigger very intense psychic experiences. For example, if you were beheaded in a previous life, then you would have a lot of difficulty if that was something that was unresolved. You would have a lot of difficulty being grounded, feeling embodied, and not dissociating, and so that would cause a lot of mental and spiritual fragmentation. Or if you had certain soul ties with maybe different occultists or different individuals that were of a darker nature, that would cause that. And I'll share one story from my own experience that is something that I was always absolutely petrified of, because again, as I said before, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was inherently bad or evil. And as I have explored my past lives and my karmic ties and whatnot, I have experienced and had a lot of memories come up of doing dark occult things in previous lives and having certain contracts and things like that. And that was something that made me feel bad at first because you talk to people, right? And everyone in the New Age community is Isis or Cleopatra or something like that. Everyone is someone, and it's always someone very positive and some spiritual guru or master or something. And for me, I was like, how come when I go back and have these experiences, it's like these really crazy dark sex rituals? What is happening? I was mortified. And now that's something that I don't feel shame about at all, because I feel like it is just part of what I'm meant to talk about now from a different perspective. And I feel that I'm intended to talk about things at times that are more taboo and that are darker and pull light into that. And I don't think any of us should feel ashamed about our past, whether it's in this life or in past lives, because it all brought us to where we end up being. And I think it's very important, and it's more important to have learned from certain mistakes and to have answered the call of Christ, really. And I don't think that is something that is held against anyone. But I will say that a lot of my lower astral experiences from a very young age were actually because of those certain contracts that I had. And one story that freaked me out so badly when I was younger is that my mom, when I was a baby, went to see a psychic. It was the only time she ever did anything like this. And then after that, this really propelled the dogmatism, as you can imagine. But she took me to see this psychic, and she was actually asking about something totally unrelated to me. I just happened to be there because I was a baby, and the psychic was using a Ouija board, which very questionable in and of itself for other reasons. And the Ouija board spelled out that it wanted me. It wanted me. Totally ignored the question that was asked and said that it wanted me. And as it spelled that out, I started screaming in my little bassinet or baby carrier, whatever I was in. And my mom got out of there so fast. And so as I was a child, and I would constantly have night terrors and all these scary experiences, and I would have really horrific dreams of all this dark stuff happening. And then my mom would recount this story to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, Satan wants me. And that's how I processed it. But it's very interesting because I now know what that was associated with, and I have had experiences in adulthood in exploring my past lives that have tied that together for me. And yeah, it's a very interesting experience, and now that contract is no longer alive. It's not something that it's not something that's expected of me anymore. It's something that I have broken and that I have healed. And so it is possible to heal different things and recover from that, but that is also a cause of psychic trauma. And a lot of people won't even know that they have some sort of curse or contract on them. And that's why it's so important to go into very deep meditation and ask for those things. You don't necessarily have to do a past life regression if you don't want to do that. In fact, I'm a firm believer that these things will come up if you're supposed to know, if you're supposed to know about it, just simply in meditation or in prayer. I don't think you have to do anything special to get it to come up. And I also don't necessarily think that we should go looking for trauma memories. So the last one is dissociation from trauma and drug use. And I'm just going to be completely frank. There is no level of drug or alcohol use that won't impact us psychically in some way. So that's not to say that you can't drink occasionally. That's not to say that you can't smoke occasionally. It's not to say that you can't microdose. You can technically do whatever you want to do. But it's about the fact that even when we're utilizing plant medicine and we're using it as a medicine, we have to also understand that there are certain psychic implications and psychic side effects. I am regretting putting a bell on my cat's collar, if you can hear that. So there are certain things that come out of it that we need to be aware of. And as I was stating in the beginning of this video, when we allow ourselves to get to a certain point in dissociation, we open ourselves up to be a breeding ground for entities. I mean, anything and everything will come in, it will attach to us, and it will do whatever it wants to do. So that is something to be very mindful of and be very aware of when utilizing those things. So for me, because I'm a working psychic, I don't drink, I don't use any substances, and I used to use a lot of substances. I in the past, and obviously I shared before, I used to be a drug addict, I used to be an alcoholic, and I did reach a point where I could have those things without it having any power over me. It wasn't that. It was that I realized that it was very poor psychic hygiene for me. And so because of the lifestyle that I live, it was not worth it for me to continue because it was just causing too many problems. And that's not even just with trauma and drug use and things like that, or alcohol abuse. That can also happen with medication, or really anything synthetic that we are allowing into our body. And by synthetic, I don't even mean synthetic as in not natural. I mean anything that is separate from our form that we are introducing to our body. We have to understand that we have elemental forces within our body. And when we take part in certain things, these forces can become either balanced or imbalanced. And the more clarity you develop psychically, the easier it is to see these things and to work with that balance. So even though we already went over a little bit of this in the beginning, if you go to slide 3 now, we're going to talk about some manifestations of psychic trauma. So the first one I have on here is regular sleep paralysis and nightmares. So if you are going to sleep every night and you're afraid to go to sleep because you know that you're going to have some sort of nightmare or attack or scary experience, that is something to pay attention to, because it is often an indication of psychic trauma. And that is because when we go to sleep at night, we are entering the astral plane. And so if we are disembodied, if we're ungrounded, if we don't have any protection around us, if we have some of the karmic ties that I was talking about with the last slide, and we aren't working through any of this stuff, or if we are heavily using substances and then that's opening us up when we go to sleep at night on the astral plane, then this stuff is going to be a lot more common. So we also have abductions and astral abuse. This is something that used to happen to me all the time, and it was absolutely terrifying. It was to the extent and the point where I knew people by name, and I would go to sleep, and it was like I would have these periods where every night for a week I would go to sleep and have these horrific experiences of being experimented on, or standing in line waiting to be experimented on, and being with all these other people or trying to escape or whatever. And I would wake up so exhausted. I would be afraid to go to sleep. And so I would just stay awake as long as I could, and just feel very terrified of those experiences. And then sometimes I would eventually fall asleep and experience some sort of attack where something would project itself into my room and basically be attacking me, or trying to enter my form, or something terrifying like that. And I experienced that all the time, and that's not something that I experience anymore. Short of, the very, very, very rare occasion of if I am, so for example, before I ever spoke publicly on a podcast about my detransition, I had something appear to me, and basically it was this lower astral entity, and it basically tried to threaten me. And it was interesting because I noticed that it couldn't even project itself fully into my home. It was something that I was seeing as it was outside of my home. And it's like, you better not talk about that. And it was telling me all of this crazy, crazy stuff. And I felt very unaffected by it. It was a very, I kind of had a lot of distance between myself and that, because I was seeing it so clearly, and I had an understanding of, well, now I'm really going to talk about it. You don't want me to talk about this thing. Now I'm really going to talk about it. And I kind of took it more as confirmation. And then I also had an experience that I've spoken about in videos before, where my brother, he had got me this vintage dress for my birthday last year, and I loved it. And so he brought it over, and I realized that it started to fill my home with this energy that felt like I was being watched all the time. It was very uncomfortable. I was having these bizarre, intrusive thoughts. And I had a cold at the time, so I felt a little more vulnerable, and I was like, that's fine. I'll stick the dress outside tomorrow and it'll be fine. Well, I went to sleep that night, and the spirit of this elderly man appeared to me, and he was incredibly violent. He tried to rip my cross necklace off my neck and was saying all these vile sexual things and whatnot. And I ended up waking up and deciding, I don't need to keep this dress. I just didn't want to even go through all of that. And so I mailed it back to my brother because I knew that he would want to do something with it because he's also a vintage collector. And so these experiences now, they are very, very rare, and it's something that will typically follow something like the fact that it was, that elderly male spirit was attached to that dress, or before I was going to speak on something that was very, very important, like my detransition, I was experiencing something trying to get me to not do that. So those are generally the times, if you are a working psychic, that you would experience something like this. But it's not anything like what it used to be. I mean, it's not even a thought. It's like now when it happens, it's akin to, a fly entering your house and buzzing around, and you're like, this is annoying, and you just want to get rid of it. It's really not that big of a deal. And if I'm being completely honest, really, we are our own worst enemy as psychics and as occultists. And we need to pay attention to ourselves and keep ourselves in line more than we need to pay attention to even these outside influences, because within ourselves we have the forces and the impulses of Lucifer and Ahriman. And we have to make sure that that's forever balanced with Christ, because anytime we start to lean one way or the next and we're not bringing Christ into the center of that, we can lose ourselves. So it's not that we should be afraid of ourselves, but I say that to say that externally, things are not as terrifying as we make them out to be, because they only have the power that we give them. So that's very important to keep in mind. Some other manifestations are inability to enforce psychic protection. So, for example, if I am making myself extremely psychically open because I am drinking every night and I'm not setting boundaries in my life, and I am watching movies that have a very dark nature to them, and I'm basically opening all of these doors, and then things are coming in because I'm opening all of these doors, I do not then have the authority to banish something while continuing that behavior. Nothing is going to take you seriously that way. Absolutely nothing. It's like if an intruder breaks in and you're like, hey, why don't you sit down? I'm going to make you a cup of coffee. Let's cuddle up on the couch together. And then simultaneously, you're like, get out of my house. They're not going to take you seriously. Why would they? It doesn't even make sense, because you're cozying up to them. You're saying, you're welcome here. I invited you here. So we can't invite something in consistently and then wonder why, when we try to enforce psychic protection, it's not working. And that's not to say that we can't invite something in consistently, realize what we did wrong, change our behavior, and then say, you are not welcome here anymore, because we can do that. Other manifestations of psychic trauma: possession and entity attachments, so I'll say that with entity attachments and with psychic trauma in general, every single person has psychic trauma to some degree, okay? But there are some of us that have far more psychic trauma than others. And so also, to some degree, every single person is going to experience entity attachments in their lifetime. It's just not possible to avoid that, in the same way that you go outside and you might get bit by a mosquito or something like that. It's part of the environment. It's around us all the time. And we can do our best to prevent these things. But it doesn't mean necessarily that because we had an attachment that we have this super deep psychic trauma that, is going to hold us back in life or something like that. But for those of us that do have very deep psychic trauma, we are far more prone to possession, entity attachments, and things like that, which is why it is so important to prioritize shadow work, prioritize esoteric study, prioritize healing these things, so that we aren't a hub for the lower astral. And also feeling watched or having visitations, psychic attack, weaponized thought forms, So when I say weaponized thought forms, what I'm talking about here is telepathy, where people are they're kind of sending these psychic attack arrows your way. And this is actually one of the most common ways to experience psychic attack. For example, say that you post something online and it's really controversial. That's the first thing that popped in my head because I do that all the time. And you have a lot of people in your comments and they're saying a lot of negative stuff to you. Well, then you have all of these people that were thinking negative things that didn't even send it to you. And you may have triggered someone so deeply that they just walk around, especially if it's someone that knows you personally, that they just walk around building and building and building upon that energy and dwelling and thinking, how dare they say that? I can't believe they said this thing. Or maybe they're harboring all of this jealousy towards you, or maybe they have all of this envy. Maybe they hate you for some other reason, and they can consistently attack you with their thoughts. So if you are very embodied, very grounded, you are individuated, and you know yourself, these things will kind of bounce off you. And that's not to say that they won't ever impact you, because we all have our vulnerable moments. It's to say that it's not going to control your life. It's not going to be this thing where you are constantly under a state of attack. But that is what a weaponized thought form is. And so it basically, their thoughts become so strong that it creates this entity that then goes, and it's like the task of this entity is to go and to terrorize you and to attack you and put these thoughts in your head and make you believe these things. And I'll say too that the more that you understand your own thoughts, the more you'll be able to separate your thoughts, your inner world, your experience from that of other people. And the more that you understand your relationships and dynamics with other people, the more you'll understand and be able to feel energetically who is sending you certain things and kind of where that's coming from. And it will have a kind of energy signature with it. And I've had that happen before many, many, many times. And this is actually something that technically you could go in and just find out who was projecting certain things to you. But at the same time, I again think that it's best to kind of let those things manifest and come up as they are intended to, and not go looking for things like that. I don't think it's necessarily helpful for us or for the other person. And it certainly is not going to aid in the healing of that relationship if we're constantly going and looking to see if someone is pointing these things in our direction. And an example of this would be if you hurt someone's feelings and you didn't mean to, and maybe they're just going through a lot, they have their own stuff going on, and they just kind of project these thoughts towards you out of a place of hurt, but it's not how they actually feel about you. And on a better day, they wouldn't do that, and then you go looking for that and you pick up on that. It may be something that could really harm your connection or your relationship with this person, when realistically, that's not even a real feeling that they have about you. It was just a projection. So we have to be able to separate and understand these different things. But when we have a lot of psychic trauma, it's very common to not understand the difference between a projection and something that is true, and to take all of it on as if it belongs to us, and become so enmeshed that when we're walking through a crowd, someone having thoughts about us immediately translates into our thoughts about ourselves. And that is very, very common for anyone who doesn't know themselves, for anyone who is detached, who is very insecure. And this is something that I experienced a lot in the past too, because I had a lot of insecurity, and I still have to work through insecurity with different things. And it helps to initially view everything as either maybe I'm projecting or maybe they're projecting, instead of assuming that we automatically know someone's thoughts or motivations towards us, even if we feel like that's what's coming up. It is always best to approach it from that kind of perspective, and then hopefully maybe we'll have the chance in the future to clarify that with them, depending on what kind of relationship it is. And another manifestation of psychic trauma is fear and helplessness. You will feel, when you are acting from a place of chronic psychic trauma, you will feel so helpless, so lost, so broken, like there's absolutely nothing and no one that can help you, like everything is going to be a dead end. And it's an absolutely terrifying feeling, because if you can't trust yourself and you can't trust anyone around you and you can't trust your environment and you can't trust God, then there's nothing that is keeping you here. There's nothing that is grounding you. And it's very difficult to stay embodied when operating from a place of fear like that. Okay, so on slide 4, we have the black sun. And I would honestly say that along with understanding the nervous system regulation, building capacity and resilience within the nervous system, along with all of those things, the understanding of the black sun and the eighth sphere, which we're also going to get into, the differences between the two of those things, as well as where they overlap. But having that understanding was absolutely pivotal for me in overcoming certain psychic hurdles. And not even just psychic hurdles, but emotional hurdles, mental hurdles. Because up until that point, anything that I went through, anything I experienced, I very much viewed as some sort of attack or this horrible thing that was happening to me. And I didn't realize that there was anything that I could do to really alchemize that. And I did have a kind of basic level understanding of alchemy, but without these deeper concepts and understanding those, I was missing key information that ended up being imperative for me in order to integrate certain things. So I felt like I was always being pulled into the dark night of the soul. Like it felt like it was a constant thing for me. And that's really because there was this aspect within me, this higher aspect that was pushing me to transform. It was pushing me to evolve out of victimhood, evolve out of the ways that I had viewed myself and the world and God for so long. And so I kept being thrusted into these situations that felt like a curse. I mean, it felt like I was just taking one hit after the next, after the next. And if you look at my life, if you have never watched any of my videos before or seen me anywhere before, I was in a cult. I experienced a lot of abuse in there. I went through conversion therapy twice. I experienced an overdose and a near-death experience. And then I went to rehab, where I also experienced a lot of abuse because it was a teen challenge center. And anyone that knows about teen challenge usually has some horror stories to share about their experiences there. I experienced homelessness. I experienced the deaths of people that were extremely, extremely close to me, that just absolutely catapulted me into such a deep place of darkness. And I felt like I couldn't get out. And I had so much more going on than even what I just recalled here. And it just felt like I couldn't catch a break. I didn't know anyone that was experiencing things like this to this level. And that's not to say it doesn't happen. It definitely does. But it just felt like I was being targeted. And really, I was, but it was by my higher self, who was desperately pushing me to realize that I had more power than I realized that I had. And that the world was not out to get me, and that these experiences that I was having were actually opportunities for me to grow and to change and to alchemize myself. So without going too deeply into this, and I will say, I have a whole module on the Black Sun in my course on my website. It's called Overcoming the Lower Doppelganger. And it would definitely be very helpful to take alongside Healing the Clairvoyant, because there are so many concepts that are overlapping and things that would really help tremendously to kind of build that foundation. But Here, I'm just going to briefly touch on the black sun and say that the way that I view the black sun is as an invitation for transformation. So the black sun can also be viewed or understood as the dark night of the soul. And what was happening is you have this force, which is the black sun, and it's kind of like this black hole. And it has this capacity to burn away absolutely everything within you. So if you are not interacting with this force in a way where you are using the fires for purification, then what will end up happening is that it will suck you into them, and they will begin to cannibalize your form and eat away at your spirit. And so it's all about accessing the will and applying the will to gain deeper transformation and a deeper understanding of ourselves. And what happens is that if we don't have our will developed to a certain point, so usually we're not just going to be thrust into these experiences without having other experiences that kind of lead us up into this point. But if we don't have the will developed to a certain extent, and then we are thrust into these experiences, what ends up happening is we just devolve. We devolve mentally, we devolve emotionally, we devolve spiritually. And if we just completely burn ourselves up and allow ourselves to just be consumed by it, and we aren't alchemizing ourselves in any way, shape, or form, then we end up falling into the eighth sphere, because there is nothing left within us that is willing to transform. There's nothing in us that wants to grow anymore. So the black sun is essentially the journey of descent into one's shadow or your lower self. So I've spoken about this in my course. I've spoken about this in multiple videos about how we have a higher self and we have a lower self. And this translates even on a nervous system level. So we have a higher nervous system and we have a lower nervous system, and there are measurable physiological responses that let us know what we are operating out of. And we don't want to look at this from a dualistic perspective where we see ourselves as either living from the higher nervous system and the higher self, or living from the lower self, because that's not really realistic. It's more like an oscillation where throughout the day, we have all of these different experiences and all of these different events and opportunities that come up, and we are choosing how to respond to each thing. So in the new age, you have high vibration and low vibration, and I do not subscribe to that for many reasons. For one, being you can't technically move from a low vibrational state, which would be being in the lower self, the lower double, the lower doppelganger, the lower nervous system, to then doing breath work for 10 minutes, and all of a sudden you are in the higher nervous system and kind of operating out of that state. It really doesn't work that way. It's more like a very slow rising that happens. And that's not to say that from the lower state, we can't still have moments where we connect to our higher self. But when we do that, when we are connecting to our higher self, we're connecting to something that isn't necessarily outside of us, but it's a part of us or an aspect of us that we really haven't integrated yet. And so what I see so often happening in the new age is there are people, and I did the exact same thing, who instead of integrating the higher self are kind of just going back and forth between, oh, I'm in the lower self, but now I'm going to meditate for a few minutes and connect with my higher self. But then I'm going to go back, and I haven't really changed, and I may have changed on a surface level, but my nervous system is still dysregulated, and I'm not setting boundaries in my life, and I don't have this esoteric foundation. And so because of that, I'm going to kind of really struggle with these certain lower qualities, because I don't actually know how to bring myself into a higher state and how to pull the higher state into myself to be integrated so that it's more consistent with my day-to-day life. So that's really what ends up happening in the new age. So I don't want you to think of this from a new age perspective of I'm either good or I'm bad. I'm either in this higher state or I'm in this lower state. This is about integration. This is about slowly transforming our lower aspects by pulling them into the heart, by pulling them into Christ, by pulling them into light, and allowing them to be alchemized in the fire of the Holy Spirit, allowing them to be alchemized through our will, because our will is so strong. It wants us to heal, it wants us to get better, but we have to activate that. And in order to do that, we have to stop feeding the lower self all the time. And that is, again, why my course, Overcoming the Lower Doppelganger, is very, very, very important. And I mean, I can only hope that my future courses can live up to it, because I'm very proud of it, and it's so in depth. And I just think that it's pivotal for understanding this, really. And so the Black Sun, it's also a chance to confront and transform aspects of ourselves that have been formed from trauma and pain. So what so often happens to us is we have these traumatic experiences, and we form certain aspects of ourselves, or certain aspects of ourselves, or like I was talking about in the beginning, we have this fragmentation where we may be responding to something from a wounded inner child, or responding to something from an angry protector part, and none of it's integrated. It's all completely fragmented. So we can't be consistent individuals. We aren't whole. And so we don't really understand who we are, because we look at these manifestations of our pain and our trauma, and we think that's our personality. We think that's just who we are as a person. We think that we can't change. So if you are the kind of person that can't follow through with things, and feels distracted, feels like apathetic, and like you can't get excited about life, feels dissociated and beat down, and all of these things, that is not an indication of the true self. That is an indication of the trauma self. And so when we are in the Black Sun initiation, we have this very powerful opportunity to separate ourselves from that, not in the sense of bypassing, not in the sense of saying, you are not me, but in understanding, this is not the whole of me. This does not define everything about me. This is one aspect, and I actually have the power to raise this aspect to the highest version of itself, to bring it into its highest quality, and to operate from that place instead. So it's a very powerful opportunity to do that. So what was happening to me for the longest time is I would have these Black Sun invitations into initiation, this invitation into the dark night of my soul, and I would be completely consumed by it, because I didn't have any awareness that certain aspects weren't me, weren't the core of me. So I would be sucked into this, and it felt like I was having every single negative aspect within me mirrored to me in a way that was so terrifying, in a way that was so intimidating, and in a way that brought about so much fear and shame. And so I had never heard of the Black Sun ever. And then when I finally became introduced to it through Gigi Young's work, I was completely shocked, because I had made so much progress on my own at that point, but there were certain hurdles that I just could not get over, certain things I just couldn't get past, and I did not understand why. And watching her video on the Black Sun, it was absolutely mind-boggling to me, and I'm not sure if it's still up on YouTube, but I do know that it's available on her website. So definitely go check that out, because it's super powerful, and very, very eye-opening. But for me, having that experience, it was like an out-of-body experience, because I understood everything in one instance. It didn't feel like I was learning something. It felt like I was awoken from a dream, like I suddenly understood something that I did not understand before, and I couldn't believe that I had forgotten it. I couldn't believe that the information it all seemed so available to me now. It seemed so obvious to me, and I just thought, if I had known this before, if I had remembered this, if I had understood this, I would have done everything so differently. And it really changed my entire life. So I think it's very important to understand. And like I said, in my course, Overcoming the Lower Doppelganger, I do have an entire video module dedicated to the Black Sun. So it's associated with both creative and destructive forces. So the Black Sun often gets a bad rap because people look at it as this destructive force, and it pulls you into it and kind of rips you apart at the center. And that's true if that's how we interact with it. But it is actually an incredibly creative force. It brings life, it brings alchemy, it brings change and transformation. And it's very powerful. So I have been doing something that I actually, when I was teaching psychic development one-on-one, I would do this exercise with my students. And it's essentially an exercise where you are visualizing, and I'm an artist, so I like to visualize things. You are visualizing the Black Sun, that's always visualized around the womb space. And if you are a male and don't have a physical womb, you can still visualize it in that same vicinity. And then the white sun, which is made up of solar forces, and that's generally kind of in this general area. And it's a practice of emotional regulation and oscillation. It's actually a very somatic practice where you allow yourself to drop into the Black Sun temporarily, in the sense that when certain feelings come up and they are very heavy, such as fear or pain or trauma or shame, you allow yourself to feel it until you have reached your capacity. And it's very important that we understand what our capacity is, and we will feel that in the body. So for me, I, in the past, would start to feel dissociated. If I was starting to reach my capacity, I would dissociate. I would feel nauseous. I would feel very physically restless and uncomfortable. And it was very difficult for me to continue what I was doing for that reason. It was like I was crawling out of my skin. So you want to allow yourself to feel these very difficult sensations in the body, these very difficult memories or experiences. And you don't even have to focus on it in the sense of replaying a memory or anything like that. You want to set the intention for whatever it is, and then allow the sensation to manifest in the body is the most productive way of doing it. And then once you reach your capacity, you immediately visualize pulling up what you have brought forward up into that Christed solar energy, which is all emanating from the heart. I mean, Christ is not an external figure. Christ is within us. The impulse of Christ can be activated within us through the heart and through our connection with the heart. And so you want to pull it up into that space and allow it to kind of dissipate into that energy. Allow that Christed energy to fall over you like almost like a warm sheet or a warm blanket or something. And it can help if you are struggling to connect to any feelings of holiness or reverence or awe or wonder, or struggling to connect with the Holy Spirit or with God because you feel so dissociated. I have been there, and you are not alone. I used to struggle tremendously with that because I had so much fear in my system. And so it can help tremendously to have some sort of resource that you can use. For example, I wear a cross every single day. It also used to help me to smell frankincense oil. I love it's actually technically frankincense and myrrh together. And I still use that all the time. I love it. So it can help to smell that, or to smell honey, or to taste honey, or any, whatever your association is with holiness or beauty or love. And if you feel like it's too abstract to attempt to connect with Christ at first, then really go for connecting with anything that is going to create a sense of safety in your body. For example, if you have a significant other that makes you feel safe, then you could pull all of that pain and suffering and fear up into that feeling and memory of safety with them. And I actually have a video. It's about 5G, Wi-Fi, EMFs, and their effect on the nervous system. And in that video, I talk very in depth about resourcing and some other somatic practices that would be very relevant in this case. So when you are going through this invitation for transformation through the black sun, it does not have to be this abstract experience where you're fighting for your life mentally and psychologically and spiritually. In fact, your best bet with overcoming this is to bring yourself into the body in any way that you can and ground yourself into the body in any way that you can. So anything that brings a sense of safety, a sense of awe, a sense of wonder, a feeling of love, a feeling of security, those are the things that you want to focus on when you are going through this. And when you are in this kind of initiation, you want to take it at whatever pace you have the capacity for. So something that I always say is to only move as quickly as the slowest part of yourself. And it can be very tempting to just dive in head first and try and confront everything all at once. But without the proper preparation, we will be completely consumed doing that. So if you find yourself in this kind of experience, the best things to do right off the bat are to focus on grounding yourself within your nervous system, develop an understanding of your body, of what your body is speaking to you, of what your body needs. Understand when you're going too far with something. For example, even meditation, when you're in a black sun period in your life, may be too overwhelming. You may need to do a somatic meditation instead, which I also have. I have videos about on YouTube as well as a somatic meditation in my Overcoming the Lower Doppelganger course. And you want to really ground yourself into esoteric study. And you don't want to do so in a disconnected way. So when we talk about studying occult science, you can technically just jump in and start with whatever it is that interests you, but often what we need the most might not be the most interesting to us at the time, but it is very, very imperative to our growth, and it's foundational to our ability to overcome certain situations. Because if we don't understand what's happening to us, it's absolutely terrifying. You know, if you are, I always have the weirdest analogies popping in my head, but if you are in the middle of the ocean and you feel something pulling you down and you don't know what's happening and you're just drowning and flailing, that's an absolutely terrifying experience. But if you slow down and realize, oh, my foot is actually caught in this net, and all I have to do is calm myself down for a second and go under the water and unhook my foot, and then I'll be free, then I'll be fine. But if we don't know that, if we don't understand what's happening to us, then we just drown because it's too much for us to handle. It's terrifying, it's dark, it's all encompassing, and we don't know how to process what's happening to us. So it's very important for us to dedicate ourselves to this understanding. And if it's too difficult to understand certain concepts, there are so many awesome people on the internet talking about things and making videos on stuff. And that is one of the perks of being an occultist and going through this in 2024, almost 2025, is that we have a sort of access point into this stuff that previous occultists didn't have. They had to work a lot harder than we do. Not to say that we don't still have to put in a lot of work, but things can be presented to us in a way now that is so much more palatable. So my final point here is that mishandling this energy can lead to internal destruction, which is the 8th sphere trap, or cannibalization of the soul. So if we see the 8th sphere as kind of this tunnel that pulls us into it, and we're kind of flying all over the place. It's like a pinball machine, and we're flying all over the place. And when we're in the black sun, and we need to kind of harness that energy. We need to understand what it is that's happening to us. We need to get very honest with ourselves about what we're experiencing, because again, this is an invitation for transformation, in the sense that it's shadow work. This is very difficult work. When you are experiencing this kind of initiation, it's not even enough to just understand what's happening to us. We have to also make real measurable changes in our life if we want to actually see growth and see change. So we need to set boundaries in our life. We need to get healthy as we can. That doesn't mean that our bodies have to be in a perfect state of health. It means that we have to prioritize our health. And that includes our emotional health. It includes our mental health. What kind of media are you taking in? What kind of news are you taking in? What kind of music are you listening to? What kind of advice are you taking from other people? What kind of people are you surrounding yourself with? Do you need to quit your job? Do you need to leave certain relationships? This is an invitation for renewal. It's an invitation for alchemy. And alchemy, it's a purifying fire. We are coming in because things need to be burned away, not because we're being punished, and not because we need to go in and just try and survive the fire any way that we can. No, things are meant to die. We have to leave things behind. And if we don't, that is when we fall into a lot of trouble, because if we enter into this state, and the black sun, it can mirror to us so many things about ourselves. And if we are lacking self-awareness, we might project it onto other people. We might say that it's the fault of another person, or it's because this event happened, or whatever, instead of understanding, wow, this thing is happening to me as a tower moment because I am intended to give certain things up. I'm intended to learn from this. This is what I'm intended to gain from it, and quite honestly, we would benefit tremendously from approaching every hardship in our life from this mentality, and understanding that we aren't always a victim. Things happen in a way that is very orchestrated. And that's not to say that they happen because we're being punished or we're being targeted. Again, it's an invitation, and the way that we choose to view these situations, it's going to really say a lot about how we handle it and how we move through it. And that's not to say that we have to move through it from this very Zen, stoic place where, yeah, I'm just in my higher self all the time. I never feel afraid. I never feel doubt. And I'm just breezing through this. It's not a breeze. It's painful. There will be tears shed. There will be relationships lost. Things will change. You will be asked to give up stuff that feels so painful and difficult in the moment. But then in hindsight, it looks like the greatest gift. So it's really important for us to understand this, because when we are trying to heal from psychic trauma, when we are trying to heal from psychic wounds, we can't see ourselves as a victim. We can't see the world as this kind of trap that we are in, where anything that we try and do, something bad happens. We need to take accountability. We need to take responsibility. And we need to also understand that this is a loving gift, that we have so much more power than we realize that we have. And that we have the ability to transform the things in our life that are painful, to transform the aspects and parts of ourselves that we struggle to love. The parts of ourselves that we really don't like that much, that aren't helping us out very much. We can transform that, and we can integrate with our highest self to become the best version of ourselves. But that will not be possible if we don't allow what isn't for us to be burned away, if we don't allow the lower self to be transformed, if we cling to those parts of ourselves for dear life because we're afraid of what it would mean for us to let go of them, what it would mean for us to let go of certain people, to let go of certain dreams, to let go of certain ambitions. But our healing is on the other side of that. And it's not a punishment. It's a gift. And the sooner that we begin to view it that way, the more our lives will begin to transform. But I will also say that this is something that not everyone is going to be capable of in whatever place in life they are at. So if you are at a place where your nervous system is so dysregulated, you are chronically in survival mode, chronically in fight or flight, it is imperative above all else to address that before even beginning to delve into any of this other stuff, because we just won't be able to access the faculties that we need to go through certain initiations if we don't first have that down. So this has been part 1 of Healing the Clairvoyant. Part 2 is going to be out shortly. I would love to take your questions or hear about your experiences in the comments below. So please let me know what you thought about this. Let me know if you would be interested in a course on this subject. I think it's so important, and I think especially in this day and age, we have so many people that are highly psychic and they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know where they fit into society. They don't know how to harness their abilities in a safe way without being exposed to the lower astral and having to go through so much. So I think this is just so important to talk about right now. That being said, don't forget to check out the description because I'm going to have further additional reading and resources linked down there to kind of give a more comprehensive understanding of what we've been talking about here, especially because it can be a lot to take in, and it's easier to have other resources, in my opinion at least, to be able to go and kind of learn a little bit more about certain topics and subjects. That being said, thank you so much if you have made it this far. Thank you for being here with me. I love you with my whole heart, and I am looking forward to going over part 2 with you.